Tony Perrett, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here this morning.
You've been busy leading up to the election. What do you want to see?
Well, look, you wouldn't script a more difficult election period. Obviously, with the coronavirus kicking in March, obviously everything that we know has changed in the last 6 months, and including my role as a local member and what I actually do, and then, of course, in the lead into the election. So, challenging times for everyone. But of course, we're aimed and focused on October 31.
What has changed and what will change and continue to evolve in the way you're dealing with it? And it must be frustrating being in opposition.
Oh, extremely frustrating, Mark. Extremely. I've spent 2 terms in opposition, almost 6 years. So I can get up in the Parliament and make the most informed and passionate speech about a particular matter on behalf of my constituents and my electorate. But unless you actually have the numbers in the Parliament, it's very, very difficult to get legislative change.
Can you see yourself as the Minister and moving into the Cabinet?
Well, look, it's certainly a great privilege to serve as a member for Gympie, and obviously my focus is being re-elected on October 31. Should we, as the LNP, gain enough seats and then be able to form a government, I would love to serve in a Cabinet. I've served in the Shadow Cabinet for the last 3 years, and once again, that's a great privilege to be able to do that, and particularly to represent the interests of agriculture, fisheries and forestry around that Shadow Cabinet table. But you really do need to be in government and in a Cabinet to be able to make those changes.
You have a background in the rural, and is that how come you've got that Cabinet, that posting?
Well, I certainly have a good understanding of issues in and around rural and regional Queensland, in particular agriculture. That's my background. Grew up on a property in Kingaroy, where we farmed cattle and horses, of course, but also row crops, peanuts, which is unsurprising to a lot of people when you say you come from Kingaroy, but always like the cattle and horses. So, yeah, got a strong background in rural and regional Queensland, in particular agriculture. So, when I do liaise directly with industry groups, I do have a basic understanding, but of course, agriculture is very diverse here in this state.
What do you bring to the table as the local member to represent them? You've got a lifetime of political involvement.
You like to think you bring a common touch to it. You do. Of course, we've still got our rural property. It's a family property that my wife and my daughters are involved with. So you bring a common understanding of the issues that are important. And by and large, it's being involved in government shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be. Yes, it can get complicated from time to time, but you want to see people succeed. You want to improve their lifestyle, and of course that's what I aspire to achieve as a local member. And I did in my local government days. Remember, I had 13 years in local government prior to being elected into the Parliament in 2015. So I've served my community for a long period of time. And look, there's a lot of diverse opinion, and you don't always please everyone, Mark, in this job. Very difficult. You have strong opinions on all sides of arguments, but of course you look for the best and the best outcomes for the particularly for my constituents.
As you say, you have served the community for a long time. What got you into local government and politics in the first place?
Look, I've always had a strong interest in politics, going back to my teenage years. Always, was aware of what was actually happening. Got involved, particularly at that stage, in the Young Nationals, which gave me an opportunity to be able to mix socially, but also then have an interest in policy development, and that was important to me, particularly when I hold strong views about certain aspects in and around rural and regional Queensland, in particular agriculture, and then of course we shifted from Kingaroy, my wife Michelle, and then we had 2 very small daughters at the time. Moved to Kilkivan, and we made that home where we bought a cattle property. Then I got the opportunity then to run for the former Kilkivan shire. So back in 2003, I was actually appointed to fill a vacancy at that point in time, and then elected into Kilkivan Council 2004. Then that flowed through to the amalgamation of council. You recall Kilkivan, Gympie, and part of Kalula, and then part of Tyro were formed. Created to. There was a process at the time where they went through the amalgamations that then formed the Gympie Regional Council. But before that, we'd been sort of working, individually as councils. But at that stage, that got me then to be able to serve at a higher level.
Was the amalgamation a good thing for the area? Because some of the smaller, I know some of the smaller areas did complain that they'd get swallowed up and wouldn't get the attention that maybe they did when they had their own council.
Yeah, look, it was certainly a challenge. I recall, Kilkivan days, like there was just a very rural council. It had 3,500 residents, had an area of almost 8,000 square kilometres, and look, they, in my view, did a very, very good job. But yes, there was challenges coming for those smaller councils, and of course, the government decided they were going to amalgamate councils right across this state. And as I mentioned, here it was Kilkivan, Kalula and part of Tyro were put together to form the Gympie Regional Council. And by and large, I think it's worked. But you've got to work hard to make it work, Mark. You really do. It's easy to get distracted in the higher population areas and maybe take your focus off the outlying areas. Something I've never done because I appreciate what we have across the whole region and the whole state for that matter.
Well, especially since you come from a rural background.
Yeah, and look, and that's what drives me with it. Yes, look, we live in a very, very good region, and the electorate that I represent is a very good electorate. Obviously, you've got Gympie as the main population centre, but you've got everything that sits around it, whether it's from Rainbow Beach, Kalula Cove, Tin Can Bay on the coast, then back into the Mary Valley, here where we are today in Widgie, or Glastonbury, Widgie, and then back into the north, in towards Glenwood, Glenelg, Curra. Great region and very diverse, and a lot of interests, that don't align. But geez, there's a lot of people that a lot of good people in this region that work hard to make it a success.
It certainly is. It's an interesting thing that you said that as a teenager you had an interest in politics. It's not something there's most teenagers. Does it surprise you that you had that interest at such a young age?
Oh, look, not really. Look, I grew up, obviously in Kingaroy, and the Premier was Sir Joe Bajocki-Peterson. So there was just a natural interest in politics. I mean, around that, I recall my schooling years where he used to come to the primary school where I went, and his wife Flo did as well. So I always had that natural interest, never thinking I'd ever end up in politics. But Mark, it was just opportunities that had presented themselves that probably have led me today. Like, I didn't set out to pursue this. It was one of those things, but even in local government, it was just the fact that there was a council resigned back in 2003 that gave me the opportunity to put my name forward to be considered. And then, of course, you go to an election every time. In local government it was every 4 years. State politics has been 3, although now they're moving to 4-year fixed terms. So, look, you never take anything for granted. Like, the people put you there, and they can throw you out just as quickly. So you've got to keep working hard, never take anything for granted, and keep focused on what the electorate wants.
You talk about Joe and Flo. What were they like?
Look, they were great people, really great people, and their family, very good family people. Obviously, when you serve at the level that they did, there's an enormous amount of responsibility. But particularly in that period, they were great leaders here in Queensland, and I don't think Queensland would be what it is today without the leadership that was shown by Sir Joe back in the 70s and 80s.
It's interesting. I remember the story because I was covering politics as a journalist at the time, and I remember Joe got bitten by his own dog because he hadn't been home enough.
Yeah,
and that's a lot of pressure. What sort of pressure do you find sort of being on the road and out and about as a politician? How does it affect you and the family?
Well, look, it's constant. Local government was probably a little bit closer to home. Of course, you still do everything you need to in the electorate, but being a shadow minister, you have the responsibilities across Queensland, and industries are always wanting to meet with you, and of course, I accommodate that because it's important that I understand their issues, and then can make those representations, particularly around the shadow cabinet table, and then in the parliament where necessary. So look, it's busy. You are away a lot from home. I've been lucky. I've got a very supportive wife and Michelle. My 2 daughters have now grown up, so they were educated locally, and they still work locally, but they're now young adults. So it just makes it that just a little bit easier. Very difficult if you still had very young children to be able to find the balance between your elected role, and then obviously your role back at home.
Were you from some sort of political dynasty? Your father, Trevor, was obviously part of the
Borbidge government.
Borbidge, that's it.
Yep.
How did that influence you?
Look, it was challenging at the time. I was obviously in my teenage years when he was a member of the government at the time, and but I had to take on the responsibility of the property at the time, and look, it was a challenge. It was certainly a challenge because you're definitely in the public eye even at that stage. You're aware of what's going on around you, so there are challenges, but equally I've kept, and I like to think I've kept very grounded through it all. You learn a lot, of course, through it. I tend to like to do a lot of listening. Like I said, there's lots of opinions. People have enormous amounts of opinions, and yes, when I'm asked for an opinion, I'll give an opinion. But you've got to be a very, very good listener, and then work out what's genuine in this, in the role that I have. Because by and large, most people are very good, but you also see some people that have their own vested interests for whatever reason, and you've just got to be able to to work your way through it. And I think I can do that, but you do that with experience.
Because of the fact that you did have that responsibility, it must really give you an understanding of what Michelle and the girls have had to cope with, and still do, when you're out and about as a minister or shadow minister, hopefully minister in the next government. It must really give you that really acute understanding.
Look, it does, and like I said, there's a lot of pressure that's involved in this job from time to time. Like there's deadlines, there's timelines that you've got to follow, and it's important that you do actually follow those, because I don't like to let people down. We do our best to resolve issues, and I know I've got two great staff in the office that do a lot of work to be able to assist that process. And some of the great rewards are not some of the bigger issues, but believe it or not. I get many requests through my office, and if I can resolve an issue for someone that they've been beating their head against a wall for a long time, and I can do something to assist, then most times that's the most gratifying process of what I actually do and achieve.
Away from politics, you've got the property. Tell us about that and how it all works and how you're involved and what you're up to.
Look, it's just it's a grazing property at Kilkivan. Really, quite a good grazing property. So, family property of my wife and daughters have an interest in that property, and I enjoy it. Like cattle and horses are what I do naturally. They are something you get a lot of reward out of, and at the moment beef prices are pretty good. There's been some challenging times, and I've just got to go back earlier in the year, and everyone that was on the land in this region would know that
you couldn't give them away.
You couldn't give them away, and the drought was I don't think we'd seen a drier period earlier this year, sort of late last year into January. A lot of people are starting to get worried, and of course that's the sort of complexities you go through on a property, and you try to mitigate that the best you can. But even sometimes with the best management processes, it does get a bit more challenging. So I'm lucky. They've got that natural interest in it, and one day when I'm finishing this job, I very much look forward to going back to that property.
With the rural aspect, what's the thing that you really like the most about it?
Well, look, in a lot of cases, it's the isolation. It really is, Mark. Funny enough, my mobile phone doesn't work on our property, or only works in very select areas on that property, and that's a good thing, because at times you do need to get away. You're connected to it on a daily basis, particularly with the technologies we have now. Everything's in front of us; it's in our hands all the time. But you do need to release from that. And for me to go back, jump on a horse or get back in a set of cattle yards and draft cattle, I don't have to think about that. That just happens naturally, because that's what I did before I got into this job. And look, of course, I still get onto the property very occasionally. And be able to experience that. But the frustration is you can't get any length of time on the property to be able to set yourself some tasks or goals and then be able to get them completed.
You talk about that you love the isolation. You've really picked the wrong job in some ways. How do you cope with the fact that you've got so many people that are looking for a slice of your time?
Look, you've got to balance it out. You really do. You've got to make certain you get the priorities. And of course, the priority is your electorate. So not only do I have meetings in my office, and then there's lots of constituent meetings, I make myself available, throughout the electorate, with mobile officers, where you actually go into certain regions. And look, a lot of times you don't get people that come and see you, and that's probably a good thing, because if they're not coming to see you, presumably there's not too many issues that they're dealing with. But you've got to community events. I love attending community events, and it's one of the things that we've seen in the last 6 months. A lot of those community events have been cancelled because of coronavirus. There's just a few now that are starting to kick off again, where you can go and sit down and have a morning tea or lunch with a group of community-minded people, and it doesn't matter whether it's a school, P&C, or whether it's a CWA, or whether it's a sporting group. I love going to those, and I'll be doing that again this week. I think I've got to go to a bowls club to present a Queensland flag, which is what I love doing, because you just get that interaction, and through that interaction you'll learn a lot, Mark. You do. You hear what the people on the street are talking about and what they're thinking.
What's the biggest surprise then, as being the member for Gympie for 6 years? What's the biggest surprise that when you went into the job that you find out on the street that you didn't think that you'd expect?
Look, a lot of it's just common sense, lawmaking, Mark. It is. The problem with it is you see a lot of situations where it's not about common sense. It is not. It's about political deals that are done, and look, I guess that's easy for me to say because I sit in opposition, and it is frustrating when you do. Yes, we make representations to ministers about a lot of things, and you do get some positive outcomes, but a lot of times it can take weeks, if not months, to get responses, which is frustrating. So, look, this is a good region. It is a really good region and an easy region to represent. Look, it's important. We've seen the investment, particularly from the federal government, into the four-laning of the Bruce Highway to Gympie, and that's made an enormous difference. Not only has it built confidence within the residential and business community, but it's saved lives. We all remember that notorious section of road south of Gympie between there and Karoi, a terrible stretch of road. Now, while you're not directly involved with the decision making to actually build that, there were certain advocacies that you've done and I continue to do, with roads around this region. But to see that commitment, and then to see that that magnificent highway that's built to Gympie, is satisfying. And they're the sorts of things that governments are responsible for, and you've got to make certain that governments deliver the infrastructure that they're responsible for.
What would you say in your term as the member for Gympie are some of your biggest achievements?
Look, probably one of them that stands out, and it took me 4 years to resolve this, was getting the University of Sunshine Coast, for them to get access to an unused and empty TAFE building at the Gympie Education Precinct. That was terribly frustrating because it was a building that was just sitting there unused. The University of Sunshine Coast obviously had their campus. It was full. They couldn't accommodate any more students there. They wanted to expand their presence in Gympie, and there was a building there, 50, 60 metres across a car park that they'd been promised by the former government, but of course a change in government, it wasn't delivered, and then you had to fight, and that was one of them. Yes, it was a lot of kicking and screaming, but the community were behind me. The local media, were obviously on board with it and could see the benefit for the region. It just took a lot of advocacy to the government to get it across the line, and unfortunately we did. So that's one that comes to mind. Look, there's obviously the smaller ones that where you get just constituent issues. Whether it be health, whether it be education, whether it be child protection, all those sorts of things we do on a daily and weekly basis, and you get some really good outcomes.
Speaking of outcomes, what do you really want to do? Say the best case scenario, the LNP is elected in the next term. What do you want to achieve for the Gympie electorate?
Look, the Gympie region is well positioned to grow, and we know that. But it's got to be the sort of growth that we want in this region. We see so much across Queensland where we've seen unbridled growth without the necessary infrastructure commitments to be able to support it, Mark. And you've only got to drive to Brisbane, and we all experience when we drive there, when you get into peak hour traffic or that traffic that just doesn't flow. Then when you've got to try and retrofit infrastructure, and that's what they're doing in Brisbane, trying to retrofit infrastructure into a busy city already, it just becomes very difficult and very expensive. And one thing that we do have the opportunity to be able to do in these sorts of regions is get the planning right. Yes, look, there's some great challenges in and around Gympie, and we all know about those with the flooding and everything that sort of links back into some of the decisions were made 150 years ago in respect to the when Gympie started to be built. But we still have a great opportunity to be able to get the infrastructure spends right, Mark, and it's important that we do that. And whether that's directly into health, whether that's into education, whether that's into our road system, and the support services that sit around it, we've got to get that right. And because this region is going to grow, we're seeing it, Mark. We're seeing it, and it's a great place to live. It's not far from the Sunshine Coast of Brisbane.
Well, now with the highway, people can just commute.
Well, less than 2 hours, into the centre of Brisbane if you get a good run. But it's important that you build it correctly. And I think the way this region and what it is, particularly with our rural residential sort of lifestyle, it's very, very good. It's something that we must retain. I really don't support high density living. Yes, you get that in the cities, but this region needs to be built in and around a lifestyle.
Do you think we should be expanding on the lifestyle by growing more houses, as being quoted by certain real estate agents, that we should be building our population base?
Look, it's happening in Queensland anyway, so we want to get our share of it. Yes, it's got to be managed, Mark. It's got to be well managed. Look, at the moment, you talk to local real estate agents, properties come on the market and are sold very, very quickly. And of course, you want to, then you've got to build the economies around it. It's just no use building houses. Housing is one sector of economy. Of course, you look at construction and agriculture are still the key economic drivers, manufacturing in this region. So you've got to be able to support existing business to be able to grow their business, and particularly the job opportunities that come with it. Because if you can bring more people to the region, but at the same time increase the wealth of the region, and the average weekly earnings, then we're all better off. And that's what I think all government should aspire to, is to make certain that the next generation is left in a better shape than what the previous one.
Looking at the show Yes Minister, and it was always number 10 was floating in the background. Do you have aspirations to move to the Queensland number 10?
No, look, Mark. I just want to be elected as the member for Gympie again. Look. What then happens is up to the Parliament, obviously the party in the Parliament. But look, if I can serve in a cabinet, that would be a great privilege, because when you serve in a cabinet, you are able to bring certain influences around not only your electorate but also the shadow portfolio, and then the portfolio that you then represent around that cabinet table. And look, rural and regional Queensland is great, and look, when you look at the demographics of the Queensland population now, 2/3 of Queenslanders live in southeast Queensland. So Gympie is the first region that's removed from the official boundary, and look, ideally, I think future population growth should be outside of southeast Queensland. Now that's not always going to happen, but if we're able to achieve that, and I can bring advocacy to that around a cabinet table to make certain that what people take for granted in southeast Queensland is then delivered into the regions, to make certain that when they want to move there, that they actually have the basic services, then I think that would be a great outcome, Mark.
You talk about southeast Queensland. Do you think that a lot of the government departments are based in southeast Queensland? Would you push for a decentralisation of government departments as such?
Look, I think government needs to have a focus on that. Look, you can't decentralise everything, and obviously, a lot of these departments are well established, but it makes sense to get some of the key decision making, and particularly, the responsibilities in the Department of Ag, even just to rebuild it back to what it was, would be a great achievement. A lot of the infrastructure is there, Mark. Like we look in Gympie, we have government offices that are there that are probably underutilised somewhat, and that's the same story right across rural and regional Queensland. So we don't have to do a lot to be able to put back and invest into the regions. A lot of the infrastructure there, the government infrastructure and the government offices are there, Mark. It's just a matter of having the will and it being driven from government, and it's got to be driven. You've got to make certain, particularly when you're in a leadership role, and it was no different in council, that because your elected representative or the elected representatives have an important role to drive it. and if it's not driven from the top, a lot of times it gets lost within the department and the various agendas that are even run within departments, Mark.
On the leadership stakes, we've got Anna Palaszczuk and we've got Deb Frecklington. Now, Deb's struggling in the polls. What can she do to lead the party, to carry you over the line? Is it necessary for the leader to do that? Do you think it's still that statesman-like American style as it is even becoming, say, in Canberra?
Look, there's certainly, that's driven by the media, that sort of style, Mark, and it is. Look, the reality is you've still got to keep working hard. You've got to convince Queenslanders that the policies that you have and believe in are best for the future. And look, you wouldn't script a more difficult election period. And I say this regularly, and I've probably said it earlier. If we're going to script an election and run into an election, you wouldn't do it with a coronavirus, because, of course, the Premier gets to, and rightly so, the Premier leads the response. And it's difficult for anyone in opposition to get the cut through. Look, the reality is it's very difficult for us to try and win an election talking about coronavirus, Mark. It is. Yes, it's something that we're dealing with. The concern that I have is about the plans for the medium to long term, Mark, for this state. We have an enormous debt, and the debt's increased almost 17 or 18 billion in the last few months. And when you put that into perspective, look, they're big numbers and they run by people very quickly. But we pay in this state, and when you break it down to what you pay in interest on that debt, and I say we being the taxpayers of this state, it amounts to $420,000 every hour of the day, every day of the week.
Wow.
Yep, they are big numbers, Mark. They are serious. And that was before the debt was increased, as I said, by 17 or 18 billion just in recent times.
Because of the coronavirus?
That was, well, so the 17 or 18 billion, and that was the economic update that the Treasurer gave us back a couple of weeks ago. So remember, we don't have a budget, which is challenging because as a shadow minister, you like to know what's going on by the minister that you shadow, and particularly within the department, so we don't have that information. But we do know that the budget's blown out by a significant amount. Now, of course, there was always going to be a cost to what's happening in and around this coronavirus. By and large, the federal government have done all the heavy lifting, and they have, and have pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy through various measures. However, it's debt, and it does take away from your ability to be able to invest into the future. And if you're not investing correctly, then there's some real challenges because the debt just keeps escalating, and it's no different, Mark, to private homes or whether it's businesses. It's got to be managed, and you've got to know that you've got outcomes. You don't invest money without generally an outcome, whether it's for a home or whether it's for in a business. You take a lot of risk, and that's the concern that I have, is just in and around trying to get that message through to Queenslanders. And look, like I said, Deb Frecklington is working particularly hard. She's forthright. She's intelligent. She knows what she and how she wants to lead this state. We support her 100%. But it's a difficult challenge winning government because, as is often said, governments lose government. Oppositions don't win government, but you've got to remain credible, so that you're a credible alternative to the people. And look, I believe we're in it. We are. We're working hard, but we still got another 5 weeks ahead of us, Mark, to be able to get this across the line.
Okay, talk about coronavirus. Has the government done a good job, say, with the border closures, and now there's talk that they may open up to northern New South Wales down as far as Lismore, Byron Bay, to have that bubble for northern New South Wales, but it's been closed. Has it been the right decision?
Look, there's been some challenges around it, Mark. There's been enormous amounts of challenges. Look, I go back to March, and this is interesting. We were given a brief back in March before they closed the Parliament down for a couple of months and closed Queensland down. And we had the Director General of Queensland Health come and address most MPs. And, of course, they didn't know what to expect. And they were telling us, and this was the worst case scenario, and thankfully this hasn't happened, but the worst case scenario was that there was going to be 50,000 Queenslanders were going to die. That's what they told us. Now, that was based on what they saw in the early modelling from overseas. The great challenge for the state and the country, and this had nothing to do with politics. This was all about Queensland Health, was to build the capacity within our hospitals, so the ICU capacity and the ventilation capacity, because there was none or very little, and couldn't cope with a worst case scenario. So of course there needed to be measures put in place to be able to then build it, and of course the nation did, not just in Queensland, every state did that. It's been the way, so from that point on, obviously there was a lot of businesses that were struggling. Remember, even in this region, you couldn't travel from Gympie to Rainbow Beach, it was too far. And there's a lot of businesses from March through to June that really struggled, particularly tourism businesses, a lot of unknowns. And of course there's a huge economic hit to those businesses and employment. And look, I was getting a lot of angry phone calls. I was receiving them. People, businesses that were fearing that they were going to go broke. And some of them have, and we're still seeing a lot of that. And I think we'll see that into the future, because this crisis is not over. But there needed to be a measure, and that was obviously closing the borders off. But it's then been how you actually manage that. And look, I know in my shadow portfolio there's been a lot of frustration around it, because while agriculture was deemed an essential industry, every time they've closed it down or made the restrictions tighter, they haven't at the same time provided the necessary regulatory process for those essential businesses to keep trading across the border. So look, there's no perfect scenario, Mark, but the thing that worries me is the economic challenge that we're going to get out of this. If you're unaffected or largely unaffected, you're not too worried about the borders being closed. But if your businesses are struggling and you've lost your job, then you have a completely different opinion. And of course, I get all those opinions, Mark, and it's difficult. But look, let's hope there's going to be a vaccination found that we can actually get back to some level of normality sooner rather than later, because the economic hit to this nation is enormous. Like when you see economies contract, and I think the state and national economy has already contracted 7%. There's just generally less money to go around, obviously more debt, and we're going to be feeling the effects for a long time.
In some ways, are you going to, in government, inherit a poison chalice because of the coronavirus, because of the debt?
Yeah, look, it's going to be challenging. Some of the plans that you may have are all predicated on actually, having a viable economy. And of course, we're not going to go broke, but it's what you can actually invest into. And as I said before, Mark, that $420,000 an hour on the old debt, if you think, if people just put their mind to what they could actually, if that was spent on something locally, you accumulate that for a day and then spend that in the local hospital or on a new road or new bridges or in schools, you can do a lot. And that's going to be the challenge, because when you don't have the revenue, and remembering that agriculture by and large has done pretty well, mining is still ticking along quite well, but the revenues that come from those sectors are very, very important. And if the world economy declines, and then obviously the demand declines, then those industries could be under pressure too into the future. So we've just got to be mindful of all those things. Of course, we have plans for the state, but from my view, it's got to be invested, particularly from a business sense, into the productive end of the economy, to make certain that the taxes are paid so we can support all the services that we have across this state.
What's the main worry, do you think, of the average Queenslander that you're hearing at the moment when you're approaching into the election? They're talking to you. What are their worries?
Look, it primarily comes from business. As I indicated earlier, Mark, look, people that haven't been affected or
carry on as usual.
Well, they do. Look, if they haven't been financially affected, then they're not really saying a lot. It's the businesses that keep contacting me about double standards as to why certain things can happen in one area but they can't happen in another. And why the government does that, and it's very difficult for me to explain, because I don't think it's sensible in a lot of cases. But look, it's important that the economy remains viable, Mark, because that's how we deliver everything. We live in a very privileged society, and we do. By and large, most of us don't need a lot. Yes, there's some real challenges within even this region, with homelessness and those sorts of things, and you've got to be very mindful of those and find solutions to deal with those things. But we do live in a privileged state and a privileged nation, and we've got to be mindful of that and not take what we have, at our doorstep for granted all the time, because you look around the world and there's still a lot of people, a lot of countries that live well below a standard that I think is acceptable.
5 weeks to go until the election. What is on your agenda that changes as you move into that sort of re-election process?
Yeah, look, it's a scripted process now, Mark. So we know the election is on October 31. Obviously, the Parliament will be dissolved and the writs issued, so that happens early October. So then the government goes into caretaker mode where they can't make government or political decisions. So that'll progress along. Obviously, once the nominations close, you go through the ballot draw, and look, what we're going to see, Mark, and I'm already seeing it. Like, we're getting an enormous amount of contact with the office. The old style voting, which we can go to the polling booth, that will still remain. Well, that's what we understand, unless there's some change between now and October 31. But a lot of people are either going to pre-poll or postal vote, Mark, and we're expecting at least half the electorate will vote prior to actually election day being October 31.
So essentially they've already made up their mind, do you think?
Well, look, the way you go about it now is that you've got to obviously get your messaging out far earlier. Of course, there used to be just the one day, and you used to have the run into the election day. But of course now with 2 weeks of early voting, but particularly now a lot of people wanting postal votes, they actually sit at home and do it. So you've got to obviously get that connection into those homes to make certain that they understand what I represent and what I'm promoting. And of course, other candidates will try and do that as well. And then you run through to October 31. Then the local returning officer obviously just pulls all the votes that have been cast, and then the count. And you sit there with great anticipation, of course, on election night. And I've been through a good number of those, obviously through local government and now in this role in the state parliament. But look, it's never easy. It's never easy.
Do you get nervous?
Look, you do. Look. There's a lot of things you can control, but there's certain things you can't control, Mark. And it's just making certain that there's a clear understanding of what you believe in and what you want to take forward. That you're forthright with that opinion. Of course, other candidates and opponents may have different views, and of course that's right and proper in a democracy. But you just got to make certain that it's straight up and down, that it's not misleading, that it's genuine, and what they're trying to do is actually for the best for the region, and will serve the greater majority of people.
Election night. What's the general feeling when you're sitting in there and the anticipation must be immense?
Look, it is, because you work hard right up to 6 o'clock when those polls close. So I won't relax until that point. And at that point, everything that you could have or should have done needs to be done. And of course, that's what we're doing now. And look, I'm lucky. I've got a great team of supporters across this region. Very good team of supporters that assist, because you just don't do it on your own. Campaigns cost money to run, and people expect you to do that so that you can they know what you stand for, that you attend forums, and that you speak to people. But you get to 6 o'clock, then you sit back like everyone, and you obviously have scrutineers that keep an eye on what's going on and inform you. You look at the results as they come in from the ECQ, and they're posted on the website. And then, of course, there's the media interest, and all sectors of the media have a specific interest. There's certainly key seats. They try to get the trends early to see what's going on, and they try to call elections very early. But look, the reality is, Mark, and I don't know what the ECQ are doing, but if more than half, or at least half the people vote prior to election day, a lot of times the results aren't known on the evening, because results can change very quickly. Even different demographics and type of people when they vote and how they vote, it can change. So look, you don't read too much into it early, but usually by 9 or 10 o'clock you've got a fair idea how you're travelling.
Are you confident?
Look, I'm never confident, Mark. I'm not. Look, it's just the way it is. I'm always conservative in the way I approach things. You never leave any stone unturned in this job. You work hard to gain the confidence of the majority of the electorate, and that's what you've got to do. But yeah, look, I'm just by nature someone that's just that likes to hasten slowly. You don't sort of roar in and try and make decisions out of the blue and unnecessarily. You like to be considered and to make certain that you've got those sorts of processes in place, and if you've got those in place, you've given it the best shot.
What's something that people don't know about Tony Perrett? You're the public figure, but you do like to, as you say, you like to get the isolation, you like to get into the background and get away from the whole public life. But what's something that people don't know about you?
Look, one thing that people wouldn't know, Mark, is the fact that I've judged poultry in the past. So, and a lot of people wouldn't know that, and of course, I'm not so much involved in it now because it's just a time factor. But I grew up as a young fella, breeding and showing poultry, then ultimately judging them, and all different breeds, and I love that. And one day, I like to think I'll get back to it, but just at the moment, it's a bit more challenging with time. So, yep, a poultry judge.
What sets a poultry judge apart? What got you into it? What got your interest?
Look, I grew up on a farm at Kingaroy. Both my grandfather and father were both poultry judges as well. So I used to. They used to breed poultry, so that was something that was passed on. I remember sitting there, putting breeding pens together, collecting the eggs, putting them in the incubator, hatching them out 21 days later, then going through the process of rearing those chickens, hopefully, and hoping one day to be able to breed a grand champion, because that was always the pinnacle of a poultry show, was to breed the best bird in the show. Remembering many hundreds of birds were showed at these shows. And that was always something that I strived to. But it was great. And of course, when I was a young fella, there was another source of income for me when I was a young bloke, being able to then, of course, sell poultry, either to others that were trying to breed show poultry, or if they weren't good enough, Mark, putting them in the freezer. And that happens regularly. And selling them. Don't worry. When I was a young fella, I used to pluck plenty of chooks. And then sell them to people that I knew.
Did you breed the grand champion?
I did. Yeah. I did that on several occasions, and it was more of a family type thing. It just wasn't me individually, but of course I had a keen interest in it and loved it. Getting up early in the morning, feeding the chooks, preparing them for a show, and there was a lot of preparation that was involved to hopefully have the one that would be the grand champion. Then putting them in a box, in a crate, and carting them off to a show. And I remember the time. Quite often we'd take 50 or 60 or even more to a show. So you go in the back of the Toyota and away you'd go, and then you'd show them, and then bring them all home, and then do it all again next weekend.
What makes a good chook?
Look, they're bred to a standard. Interesting enough, a lot of people wouldn't know. Of course, most people just like eating the eggs or eating KFC. But there's a myriad of breeds. There's a lot of breeds, whether they be game fowl, whether they be large soft feather or soft feather bantams or hard feather bantams. There's a lot. They're all bred to a standard. Some are more easily bred than others, just in that when you're trying to get body type and colour, and if they're a self-coloured fowl like a black or a white, it's much easier. But if they're a multicoloured fowl, you got to breed you got to get the perfection in the body type and also in the colour, and it can be very challenging. You can get one but not the other. And that's always, and that's why poultry fanciers, and don't worry, we have a lot in the Gympie region, and I think I'm still the patron of the Gympie Poultry Club. There's a lot. You'd be surprised how many people around this district that have an interest in poultry.
That and bird fancing, but also you have an interest in judging cattle as well.
Yeah, I've judged cattle, both commercial and stud cattle over the years. Not so much now. We used to. When I was a young fellow, we had a stud cattle herd, and I was always interested in that. Not so much these days. Obviously, commercial cattle is what we produce now, and look, I love it. It's always trying to produce something that's better, and that obviously that the market wants. Of course, right across all agriculture industries, there's not much use producing something that someone won't buy. So that's what we do. That's what we do on the property, and I believe that we're quite successful. That we breed. An article that by and large most buyers want.
What are you looking for in a cow then? What makes a good commercial or stud beast?
Well, look, certainly from a commercial sense, weight for age, Mark. It's what it is. Look, there's some, you see now some some breeds that are sought after more than others. You look at Wagyus, and obviously, and look, there's something we don't breed, but some breeders do, and they go into a specialised market, and you see them in restaurants, and obviously they're very, very expensive. You see Angus. Angus is another one that they've done a very, very good job. That society of promoting Angus beef. It's generally pretty good quality. And look, that's what it is. Look, when you go into a butcher shop, when you go into a restaurant or go into a cafe, and you order whatever it is, you want consistency in the product, and that's the most thing. So if you're going to go into a restaurant or into a hotel and have a steak, nothing worse than a tough steak, and we've all probably had those. You want consistency, and by and large, you don't get that now because the breeding of the stock is much better, and also the process through the abattoirs in the selection of the better quality meats to go into those particular areas is much better. But yeah, for me, it's about breeding, obviously fertility into the herd, because of course you want every cow to have a calf every year. They've got to be able to rear the calf and wait for age, Mark, because you get, at the end of the day when they go to the sale yards, you get paid on weight.
So when you're actually representing the rural sector, you really have that common touch because you are involved directly. Does that help?
Oh, look, absolutely. Yeah, look, when you can walk into a sale yards and you can actually wear a Cobra hat and look like you can have it on your head, rather than some politicians that put it on that should leave it sit in the box. And don't worry, there's plenty that do it. It's what it is. You've got to be able to understand the basics of the industry that you represent.
So you've got a great portfolio.
I do because it's what I do. And look, obviously involved in row cropping. Many years ago, growing peanuts and crops. Got a solid understanding of that as well. I also had the portfolio of fisheries and forestry, and we know forestry is a very, very important.
Well, it's a big industry around here.
Oh, it's enormous, both the softwood and the hardwood industries. And I worked in a sawmill when I was a young fella, and gained some experience. Okay. Yeah, and it was just one of those things. Like, had a natural interest in that, so you understand the importance. And look, we have some very, very fine timbers here in this region, and it is sustainable, Mark. We need well managed forest, in state forests, because it is a renewable and sustainable resource. It just needs to be well managed. And we all love it. A lot of us live in Queenslanders. There's a lot of Queenslanders in this region that have been built from the timber of this region. So something that I'm also proud to have a solid understanding of.
As Minister, what can you bring to this area that is currently not being delivered?
Look, one of the things we must support, Mark, look, we're very good at the primary production, so producing the primary product, but it's the value add, Mark, where there's a real opportunity. And that's something that I want to work with not only the local Chamber of Commerce but Council to be able to deliver that. If we can value add to the primary product that we produce, then that's a good thing.
How do we do that?
Look, it's obviously supporting, in a lot of cases, existing business to be able to be more profitable and employ more people. Look at the manufacturing in this region, whether it be timber, whether it be abattoir, whether it be even Nestle. With what they do, and while the product that they process there isn't grown locally, that's an example of what can happen. You get a lot of smaller industries, Mark, that link into those primary industries, and if you can get that value add into those products, then you get hopefully the job growth. And look, this region has been challenged and around its employment for a long period of time, but its economy doesn't have the peaks and troughs. Because it has a lot of sustainable industry, you don't get the fluctuations like some other regions in this state get, like particularly in and around mining. If mining has a serious downturn, you get a lot of those communities suffer badly. You've only got to go further north from here, and particularly into North Queensland. Places like Cairns are hurting terribly at the moment because there's no one there, because the 80% of the people that come to Cairns are generally international tourists and that high value tourism.
I know someone that just recently did a honeymoon up in Port Douglas.
Yes,
and they were treated like royalty because they turned up.
Yeah,
it must be hard.
Look, it is hard, and that's why you've got to be cognizant of those things when you're building economies and try to diversify economies. Now, we're fortunate that we have that in this region, be it tourism, on the coast and the Mary Valley and other areas, whether it be agriculture, be it construction, and as I said earlier, manufacturing. You look at the manufacturing that happens in this region, particularly in and around the timber products and the value add that then goes to it, in companies like Laminex. But it needs to be expanded, and of course, highway access, rail access is another thing. Something that I'm a great supporter of. I just wish we had, a faster train to the region. It'd be good.
Could it be something you could aim for in the next in government?
Look, absolutely. Look, it makes sense, Mark. If you can move people around quickly,
Brisbane to Cairns.
Well, look, certainly, Mark, in this region, and I know there's talk amongst the South East Queensland Council of Mayors in and around about fast trains, fast rail services, and I've written to the mayor of Brisbane City, saying, well, look, don't forget us, and obviously in the broader mix of the Sunshine Coast and Gympie. You just imagine if we had a fast rail that linked Brisbane into the Sunshine Coast to Gympie, and then even even to Bundaberg, and you could actually get on a rail service and be in the centre of Brisbane within an hour or less, and it is possible. They do it in so many overseas countries, and in a lot of cases now, Mark, it may be very well easier. As I said before, talking about greenfield sites and then retrofitting infrastructure, it may very well be easier to get people to live further out, but improve the public transport and actually get people to be able to commute backwards and forwards. And hopefully, and if you did that, and you imagine if we were able to do that in the Gympie region, where we actually got them to live here and then spend their dollars locally, it would be wonderful. And that's something, look, I may never see in my time in the Queensland Parliament, but certainly something that governments need to strive for.
When the city is bypassed, how do you think it'll affect it?
Look, I think the city's well positioned. Gympie and the region are well positioned to be able to handle it. It's not like something that's just going to happen and it's going to be done in 6 months' time. I know the Chamber of Commerce, and I regularly attend their events and interact with their executive in and around these things. Look, it's the planning's there now, and look, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, Mark. One of the things that will allow us to do in the region, and it won't completely mitigate it, but certainly in and around the management of floods. I know my time on council, I headed up the LDMG both in 2011 and 2013, and there was, it's a challenge to be able to manage floods around here. Now, the new highway is above the Q100 flood level, so it will have advantages to be able to manage those sorts of things.
We'll get access.
And yes, there'll be still some challenges on the south side, but by and large, it'll ease some of the pressures.
Should we be doing a levy bank? I was out at Charleville recently, and it's really successful out there.
Yeah, look. There was a proposal when I was on council to look at putting a levy to try and stop the flood water getting into Mary Street. But look, if you look across Gympie, there's lots of areas that flood, and yes, it may have had some benefit, but it was going to be very costly. And the thing with them is, Mark, and this was in my recollection. Look, this goes back probably 7 or 8 years ago now, when there was some talk about it. It's not just keeping the floodwaters out, but you've got to also remember it's going to be a big dam. And where it was proposed at the time, you get the 1 in 100 year rain event, which you've got to plan for, because they do happen every now and then, as we've seen. And you've got to be able to get the water out as well, because they'll pool water just as quickly as they'll keep the water out.
Well,
so
if you get over the levy, you're in trouble.
Well, that's it, and that was the other thing. If the levee's breached, then you've got all sorts of trouble. So look, no, there's been no talk of that in recent times, Mark. Look, by and large, this region handles floods very, very well. It does. It's well practiced, and I know the time when I was heading up the local disaster management group, it was every sector of the community knows exactly what to do. Whether it's from the chamber with the management of the CBD, whether it's the SES, whether it's council, whether it's the police, fire emergency services, the hospital, everyone just does things.
Even the community, I have been to a few in town when I've been covering it for news, and it's really interesting to watch. Everyone comes out of the woodwork and helps everyone else. Bobcats with forklifts, and we're just moving things out.
Yeah. Look, they do. Everyone just gets together. Look, it was a very easy process to manage. And even recall the Rural Fire Brigade involved, particularly in Mary Street. So as the floodwaters recede out of those businesses, it's important that you hose the mud out as it's going, because it's much easier to do it when it's receding than to let it dry, then trying to deal with it. So look, very well practiced, Mark. And obviously we know that the Mary River, floods, regularly. Look, if you look at the history, it's not every year, but there's been some significant floods. I recall, when you look back at the data, I think it was 1892 or 1893 in and around there was the highest ever flood in Gympie, which was about 25.5 metres. And to put that in perspective, and we all know where the Five Ways roundabout is at the town hall, the water gets up to there. So you can imagine the...
No.
Yep. Yep. So the second highest that I recall was in 1999, which I think was 21.9 metres, which got it up to Smithfield Street where the Westpac Bank is. That was the second ever in recorded history. But that flood in the 1890s, 25.5 metres, which incidentally is above the Q100 flood level, gets it right up near the town hall. So you can think, and it comes into the, and this is just recollection, and into the Mary Street at about 17 metres, thereabouts, 17.5 metres. So yeah, when you think there's a good 8 metres of water above that point, down there around Monkland Street, Mary Street, there's a lot of water.
That is an incredible, and to get it away, as you say. What's one thing, if you were to say there's one thing that really you love about this particular area, your electorate, it's so diverse, but what's one thing that you really love about it?
Look, Mark, it's the people that are in this region. Like I didn't grow up in this region. Obviously, we moved to the Kilkivan area back, about 23 years ago, with a very young family.
Nearly a local.
Yeah. Well, look, it was. Look, we integrated into the community, and I think it was by and large because of our children, because they get involved in everything. Obviously, they went to school, Kilkivan, then school, in Gympie. Our eldest daughter, went to the University of Sunshine Coast, so she was educated, locally. Their both daughters still work locally. But look, it's a wonderful people, and you look at the community interaction, Mark, and I often speak about it in the Queensland Parliament. I actually made speeches about it. If you look at the statistical averages across the state for people that volunteer within their communities, we are well above the average. We are, and whether that happens to be, in Gympie itself, or whether that's on the coast of Mary Valley or outside, the interaction of the community is exceptional, Mark. It is, and it's that's the thing, and that's what I like about this region is primarily the people. Look, beautiful region to live. Like the diversity in what we have from the coast to the country is exceptional, but it's the people that make that up, and that's why I mentioned earlier. I don't think as this region grows, I think we've got to retain that. As we all know, we go into Brisbane, and I'm there regularly. You walk down the street, no one wants to know you. You just, like where I can walk down Mary Street, or I can be in Rainbow Beach or Tin Can Bay, Imbil, anywhere, and you know people, and you pull up and you'll have a chat to them. They're always keen for a yarn, and it's that, and look, that's by and large right across rural and regional Queensland. Like, it's not something that's unique to here, but when you look at the statistical averages, we are well above the average in respect of what our community gives, and if you tried to put a value on that people that volunteer, I don't think you could. I don't know how you would actually value it in a dollar term, Mark, but the community would be much poorer without it.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head, because I know when I first came here, I was emceeing a fundraising ball.
Yes.
Made a huge amount of money, but the amount of people that just gave of their time, gave businesses that donated. Yeah. And I've been all over the country, worked in pretty well every state. It's the people that really set this region apart.
Well, look, Mark, they find a method, and whether it be those charity balls, and I know the one you're talking about, or whether it be, even at the coast, and I just, Kalula Coast Medical Transport, some challenges in and around health services there, and they found a mechanism to be able to, to assist, particularly the elderly in that area, to get to their medical appointments, be they in Gympie or be it in the Sunshine Coast or elsewhere. And they do. They find methods. People just don't sit
around and whinge and whine. They find solutions, Mark. They do. And it's very easy, and I found this in council and I find it in this job, where people want to help themselves. It's very easy for people like myself, in whatever role, to be able to assist them, Mark, because when they're prepared to use their own time, sweat and tears at times to be able to achieve their outcomes and what they're trying to to deliver their community.
Definitely makes your job easier.
It makes it easier, Mark. It makes it much easier.
Just on a lighter side, we mentioned Yes Minister. Do you watch it? Is it what happens in the Parliament and around it? Do you see similarities?
Oh, look, it is, Mark. It is. It's look, and that's the frustration. Don't worry. It is. Look, the interesting thing is in this job, and whether it was in council or whether it's now, I want people to provide fearless advice to me in and around issues. I don't want the sanitised version and what they may think I want to hear. Ultimately, you need black and white advice. And you can't do everything, Mark. Look, you do rely on other people, and you've got to make certain you surround yourself with the right people. But you don't want the sanitised version. You don't want the grey version. It's up to me as a member of parliament or a politician then to work out what the best political solution is going to be. But you need to know the facts, and unfortunately, that's not always the case. And yes, Minister, in some cases is quite true.
Can you mention some of the people that do help you? Can you name names and sort of like give them the kudos that they deserve that are part of the team that help you?
Yeah, look, it's hard to single out anyone though, Mark. It is. Look, I've got a good rapport with so many community people. As I mentioned before, it's chamber commerces, whether it's school P&Cs, whether it's medical groups, whether it's rural fire brigades. Look, I really value the work that rural fire brigades do across the region. Look, there's no one particular person. Obviously, if I had to single out one, I'd say my wife. She's an enormous support, Mark. She is, and quite often she will step into an area where if I'm away, particularly the community work, where she's more than happy to be able to go along. And look, don't worry, quite often people may rather have Michelle come along, but look, because she interacts very well, and yes, I might be the one that's there, taking the lead, but it's a team effort between myself and my wife Michelle, and it's something I'm proud of. And she supported me in local government, and she supports me now, and she'll give me fearless advice too, which is great because you need that. And quite often she picks up on things that perhaps I may have missed.
What do you miss? What don't you want to miss?
Look, the thing with it is your family. As I said earlier, look, there are some enormous sacrifices you make in respect to time, and look, that's right and proper. That's what's expected when you go into this job. But you can't afford not to find time for your family, Mark. You must find that, and I think that's across all sectors. Look, our lives just tend to get busier and busier. While the technologies, are improving all the time, I'm not certain that they make, our lives any better in respect of, we become time poor, Mark. We do. Yes, there's been major improvements, but we've got to take time, and you do have to, release from that from time to time, those pressures, and be able to spend time with your family. And for me, by and large, that's just getting back to the bush where it is, or even, and I love going to the beach. Not that I ever get there. Yes, I get to Rainbow, but I never get down Tin Can Bay. But I never get to spend any time there in a social sense, or very limited time when I do. Occasionally we get away for a holiday, and when we do, we try to mix that up. Of course, we're in the bush all the time. We're at the beach. My wife, Michelle's of Norwegian heritage, so we do like getting to the snow when we can. I haven't been there for some time, but we do like skiing and those sorts of things, which are just completely different to what we know. And to get back over, to get to Norway, where Michelle's got family members, is always good.
Any good on the skis?
I can go well enough. I can ski well enough to enjoy myself. Of course, I didn't grow up with it, and like anything, if you grow up with it, you have a much more natural affinity to it. When you get a bit older, you start to think about the times when you do crash, and you do, and you try to avoid that. But yeah, look, it's just the whole. It's just different. Once again, it's outdoors, and I love anything that's outdoors. It's just different to what we experience, and I'm very lucky that I married someone who's got that connection to that sort of heritage.
Are you a career politician?
No, Mark, I'm not. Look, I never sought this role, and I didn't. I was asked everywhere along the lines, asked to consider it, and of course, I've always just thought deeply about that, and I go right back to 2003, when I was asked to consider then to put my name forward, and I remember going and dropping it off the CEO, I think 5 minutes before it was due, before the nominations closed, because I wasn't certain. And then of course, like as I mentioned earlier, the amalgamations, that was a great challenge, because the region I come out of only had a very small population, and then you had to try and convince enough people across the region that you were worthy of their support. And it's the same in the state parliament. Look, a lot of times it's just you got to be in the right spot, to be able to. And look, that's so true across so many aspects of our lives. The opportunities that present themselves, and you've got to consider them. And of course, I've done that. But Mark, I don't want to grow old in this job. I don't. There's a lot of things that I do want to enjoy.
Get back on the property?
Well, get back on the property, because I love that, Mark. That's where I just, as I said earlier, I don't have to think when I go there. It all happens naturally, because that's just what I did. Whether it's jumping on a horse, whether that's building a fence, whether that's fixing something, or drafting a mob of cattle, you get a lot of reward out of that. And it's something that I do want to enjoy, in my later years in life.
Well, the election is 5 weeks away. Good luck. Hopefully you can represent the region on the government side of the portfolio, and maybe as a minister, if that's dictated by the Premier. What's the first thing that you'll do when you go in?
It seems pretty simple, but look, you've got to work. You've got a department that's there to deliver for the state, and every minister has that. And it's one of the areas that I want to make certain that the service delivery out of government actually meets the expectation of the people that I represent around that cabinet table, Mark. It's as simple as that. You've got to make certain that you build those confidence, but you've got to deliver. And if you don't deliver, there's only one way, and that's out. And that's why I work hard, and I will continue to work hard to hopefully have that privilege to sit around a cabinet table. And if that's the case, then in the time that you're there, that you want to actually deliver for the industries that and of course your electorate, because without your electorate, you're not there. So no, look, there's an enormous amount of opportunity, Mark. I hope to get that opportunity once again, and I'll continue to work particularly hard right up until October 31.
Tony Perrett, thanks for joining us over the bonnet.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a great privilege.